All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here in year 18 of the show. We've been doing it a long, long time. And my guest today is as experienced as I am. He's been doing this stuff for quite some time. We're going to talk about data to decisions, using the power of data to make decisions. That's the whole point of business intelligence, analytics, all this analysis that we do, all these different technologies over the years, data warehousing, data marts, OLAP cubes, all these things that we've had over the years. And even now, of course, we have artificial intelligence, which is doing some interesting things, machine learning. I'll throw some theories out about that as the show goes by, but we'll be talking to Steven Griffith of a company called Sisense. That's Sisense. They are an interesting BI vendor. So they are there to help you connect to your data sources, put them in some kind of a schema, be able to do analysis, ask questions, understand what's really going on. And every year they do a report. They have a survey of the state of data and analytics in the marketplace, and the survey came back with some unpleasant results. One of the things that just jumps right out at you is that 4 out of 5, technically it's 78%, that's an 80-20 thing. 4 out of 5 people are still making decisions without using data. So that's good old fashioned gut instinct. I'm going to do what I want to do. So why would that happen? Well, a lot of times there's friction, just hard to get at things. It can be expensive, and sometimes people are just lazy. There are all kind of reasons why you can do it. But the whole concept of embedded analytics, which is nothing new, it's been around in one form or other for probably 40 years, but it's become a much more prevalent approach in recent years. And there's a lot of reasons why. Embedded analytics makes a lot of sense because you don't want your analysts to be jumping from one tool to another tool, back and forth all day, the whole swivel chair thing. Ideally, you want the analysis to be on the screen in the technology that they use day to day. So if you go to like buy a phone, for example, you go to an AT&T store, if you peek around the corner and look at what the actual customer service rep is doing, there's usually a screen there with some scores and some recommendations and some other things that is based on data. So that's an example of embedded analytics. For if you call into a call center, for example, a more sophisticated call center will have some embedded analytics. It'll show, let's say, this cell phone topic we're talking about, it'll show likelihood to churn, for example. It's like, oh, is this a high value customer? Should I spend extra time on the phone with this person? Or is it a low value customer? And we're like, all right, fine, see ya later. We don't need your business anymore. That is embedded analytics. Now, there are lots of ways to do that, and we'll talk about that today on our show with Steven Griffith of Sisense. So, with that, Steven, welcome to the show. You're a veteran in the space like I am. I bet you were a little bit surprised to see the number that high, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that stood out. I go through the other parts of the survey, but I just keep coming back to that concept that three-quarters of the respondents said they don't use data in making their decisions. But I don't think it's because they don't want to, right? I think it's because of some of the things that you just described, which is having to find the right thing to go look at, leaving your context of your workflow, and you have to sometimes it's if it's dashboards, you have to find the right dashboard. If they're not certified, you have to find the one of N that have the same name. There's things that happen. And at some
Right.
point they give up. So, when we talk about we've been working in data for 30 years, but what have we accomplished if only 25% are using it? So it was a little bit, humbling. But it's also
Yeah.
something we saw where I think when you think about BI, the goal of BI is real, and the ROI of BI and the selling of BI is real, right? But the reality of the implementation is challenging because of what we're seeing in the survey. And so you kind of mentioned that the embedded analytics, I do see that as one of the ways to make data more what we call invisible or ambient, where you're not
Mm-hmm.
aware that you're using analytics because it's just so seamlessly part of your workflow. I think that's what we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing as a way to move towards where we get more adoption, where it becomes more of a, killer apps as everyone use it. And so how does it become a killer app? It's in the workflow that you use every day.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I will say that people tend to be what? Prone to instant gratification, ig as we used to call it. You want to get right to the nut and move on to do something else. Now, if you get a good analyst who really enjoys getting into the data, well, they're the 24%, 22%
Yeah.
that's using the analytics. And those are important people in the organization. But how often are they the decision makers? So you have all these different component parts and all these different hierarchies and threads to get across. You have data engineering teams, you have product teams, you have app developers, you have the business people using things. There are all sorts of different people around the organization, and a lot of time they are silos. So like the data engineering team, or maybe reports to the head of BI, for example. And if users have to make special requests to get certain data sets, I mean, that takes time, and it takes a significant amount of time. And by the time the engineering team has delivered a solution, whatever, the business person is probably on to the next thing and just doesn't even pay attention to it. So the point is, this whole process has to be pretty fast and pretty seamless from the user experience, right? From the user perspective. And that often doesn't happen. But I'm guessing when it is seamless, when it does move very quickly from ideation to dashboard or to alert system, that does get used, right? So time to value is probably one of the key metrics to watch out for to keep your users engaged, right?
Yeah. And I think what you said is really important. It's something I discovered over many years trying to make beautiful user experiences or interfaces. But it always comes down to this, nothing beats instantaneous. If you give someone that, like, I don't have to think, the right thing is right there, it's just so satisfying. And then if you
Right.
have a multi-step process to get to your data to find the thing, you're knocking them out of the being in the flow of their work, right? And so the other thing that from what I heard you say, I think about a lot too, is I don't know, the survey should have had a question of, okay, how many do you feel like the probability and statistics class, business class was your favorite class? And I
Interesting.
don't think that's going to be three-quarters of the people, right? And so you do need a lot of experts to really interpret data, because the big question is it significant? And it's not obvious a lot of times if it is. And we need to make that more easier to understand. That's, I think, where AI can help, because then
Hmm.
you have the expertise to interpret or define things more easily when, that part of it may not be your core competency that you provide to your business, but you still need to make those decisions on data.
That's interesting. Huh. So there are a bunch of other things that you brought out in this report. One that cracks me up is competence outpaces reality. While 81% of organizations believe they have good or full control of their data, nearly two-thirds acknowledge they can't reliably access it for decision making. Some of this gets back to surveys too, and what people answer on surveys, what they
Yeah,
think they should answer versus what's really true. And there are all these disconnects in surveys in general. But I think the message here that's quite clear is that if you can't easily get to your data, you're probably not going to use it. Not too many people are going to go to great pains to get access to something just to look at the data. I mean, unless their job is on the line, which these days it kind of is, right? So again, it's like ease of access, ease of user experience. Those are really, really important components to a strategy, right?
right. And I think when I see that line in the survey and I think about our industry, I do think a lot of the innovation in the industry has been on the data side, on getting your arms around your data. I mean, we
Hmm.
started with relational databases, we went to data warehousing, right? And then we went to NoSQL databases, we went to data lakes, we went to cloud data warehouses. There's been a real evolution there, and there's so much more. And I saw some of your recent podcasts has a couple of those topics of the next level of stuff that people are doing.
Hmm.
The dimensional modeling really triggered the BI industry, where we had a different way to access data where it was really abstracted, and that launched a lot of what we see. But the next, I think the AI and the embedded is the next thing that could really change the access of data to go after what we're seeing in the survey of the difficulty there. But so much has been done on the other end. I think there is a lot of innovation and stuff that's happened, because then the exponential growth of data had to be kept up with, right? But the access, I think AI changes everything with the embed combination, for us to do something really innovative there. And to think in terms of AI first interfaces rather than, you don't even know where all the menus go, right? All hidden features are always a problem of how to use this tool. But with AI first interfaces, we could really simplify the access of data and help our users.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that you're speaking to one of the most important parts of the strategy these days, which is immediacy and agility. You don't want a static dashboard. You want something that will adapt to what is happening right now, right?
Right. And in context, which I think you had in the opener, is it has to be right where you're going to take the action. And it's this feeling of flow. You know, if you're shooting 3-point shots and you're making every shot, the last thing you want to do is go move your car because it's in a red, right? And they come back and you lost it all. So what we want to do is keep them in that flow of their work with this kind of additional capabilities now with AI first interfaces, embedding, so that it becomes what we call ambient. It becomes invisible almost. It doesn't feel like it's a separate thing. You're not going to a destination to go do analytics. You're actually right there where you're supposed to be, and it just becomes natural.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Ambience, that makes a lot of sense. And again, it has to be fluid to your point. I have to be able to ask a question, get an answer, ask another question, get another answer, and then drill down and drill up and drill down and drill all around, right? That's the other key is the exploratory part, right?
Right. And I think that's where if it's in the context of what you're trying to do, and it's almost having less choices is better in some ways, because if you have a general solution over on a different screen and a different product, it's general and there's maybe like 300 different buttons you could click. But if it can be more in context, you could pre-filter, you could pre-do things to allow a scoping down to where even a no more novice analytic person could get a lot of benefit from that context, being a
Right.
scoping to what they're trying to do. And then you throw AI in there, and then you have an expert also potentially helping you see things that you don't see or to ignore things you should ignore, right? It's this is significant if it's you only see this one out of 100, but if it's yeah, 50% of the time this variation happens due to noise, you know not to take action. And that's stuff that I think we can improve in context.
You know, you reminded me of something really important, and I thought it was an excellent point you just made about options available to the user at any given time. And I've often joked over the years about the Adobe Photoshop example, which,
Yeah,
Photoshop, let's say 5.0. So what is that, 15 years ago, maybe? You would have 18,000 options across those file menus, and you really had to know your stuff if you're going to do anything at all in that application.
yeah,
Whereas these days, what I think happened is mobile revolutionized interface design because you have small real estate. So all of a sudden you got to think about, how do I optimize the real estate to get my user to what they are going to want to use? And that's a really interesting design point transformation. Even to this day, I think a lot of apps are, I'm like, all right, what do I do now? Where do I go? Some of these apps too, with the amount of advertising that they bake into it. Like I was on, what was it? GoDaddy the other day, just going through some basic stuff, and it keeps throwing all these ads at me and interstitials. I'm like, guys, I just want to adjust my DNS settings here, okay? But I bring this up because the point is that interface really matters, and what you look at as you're working in your workday is really important. So if you keep it nice and simple and know at what point in the workflow someone is right now, state, let's call it, and design around that state, that can go a long way to increasing user adoption and increasing value, right?
absolutely. There's another analogy to what you just described, because you can learn all of Photoshop, but then if you don't use it for 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, you're not going to be as good at it, and you're trying to remember what you used to know. And
Right.
there's a thing about
That's
playing
funny.
music. It's like if you play it every day, you're at a certain level. If you skip a day, you can tell. You skip 2 days, your partner can tell. You skip a week, your audience can tell. And
Wow.
so using something all the time is important to get the max value from it. And so I can't find the survey number right in front of me, but it's in there about how many advanced features are not used by the
Hmm.
user is one of the lines in the survey. So that goes to what you were describing in Photoshop, which I have used in my own thinking about complexity, right? And I
Yeah.
do think the AI first approach, and in particular in embedded analytics, really has an opportunity on the user experience that we've not had before. And
Hmm.
then the other thing that underneath this is rather than thinking of BI, but thinking in terms of analytics platform as a service, is that what that is like getting rid of all the biases of BI. So
Hmm.
that an API
Hmm.
first approach to build those experiences so they really are tailored to how the customer or the user of the actual or in the workflow would naturally want to have that information appear so they can take action. And so
Yeah.
that's what we do. and we're constantly thinking of new ways and innovation around that area to overcome this idea of there's a really complicated tool over there. We try to help you over there, but it still could be a lot of clicks.
Yeah, a lot of clicks to get to the nut, basically, or a lot of licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. Remember that one? I've
Yeah,
actually used that analogy in the stories. The more clicks, the more likely someone's going to get jaded and stop using it. And there is this balance that I think you have to go with of customization versus standardization, and customizing for the user is good. And that this is an ongoing process, right? Because if you customize too much, then it's difficult to manage. If you don't customize enough, you don't get enough user adoption. So the sweet spot is always in the middle, right?
absolutely. And that's the biases we talk about. You got to remove those so that the customization capability can be there. Um, but also, I think what AI offers is the closing the gap of how to look for data, interpret data, and do that as well.
Mm.
There's a podcasting or there's an interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he talks about how, I don't want to, I'm going to paraphrase this, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to the quote is, it's just not natural for us to think in terms of probability and statistics.
Right.
Then in the same interview, he says, it's one of the lastest branches of math that was discovered.
Wow.
Literally only a few hundred years old, right? He's like, a
Wow.
couple hundred years ago, he has a paper or someone wrote, it's really useful calculating the average of numbers. And one of my favorite stories is that, you know, one of the more important parts of statistics is small sample sizes. And
Hmm.
that was invented 100 years ago by I think his name is William Gossett at Guinness
Mm.
Beer to make more consistent beer. He invented that whole branch of statistics 100 years ago. So we're
That's
also talking about an
crazy.
area of trying to get, when they talk about in the survey of not using data, it's a lot of sometimes this stuff is not intuitive. And so you do need
Right.
to take classes, you need to invest in understanding. But now with AI, you could have that person from Guinness Beer, the equivalent of William Gossett next to you, helping you
Right. Well,
look at
that's
the
that's
data.
actually that's an excellent point. We'll pick that up after the break. Folks, we're talking to Steven Griffith of Sisense, all about using data to make your decisions. Really important stuff. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, your host, Eric Kavanagh, with Steven Griffith from Sisense. We're talking all about using data to make decisions. We've talked about this for 30 plus years. He and I have been in this industry a long, long time. And, one of the things that this new wave of technologies is very good at is being able to allow reporting on usage. Who's using the tool? Who's not using the tool? Which tables are used most often in my Snowflake instance, for example? Or which questions are being asked most often. When you can kind of capture the questions that are coming across the transom and do some triage on that and understand, okay, what are people looking for? All that sort of intelligence really helps, I think, optimize the use of the technology and optimizes the management class's ability to know what's actually happening. What do you think?
Yeah. So as you frame that question, I went right to, if you look at the BI tool, you can see how many people are using the license that you bought, right? And that gives you some confidence of, oh, people are using this or not. And based on the survey, you could have overestimated how many people will be using that tool. I think when you go to a sales pitch for BI, you have you kind of as a salesperson would go, the negative present, you're not using data to make your decisions. You're missing all this opportunity. The positive future, 100% of your business people are going to be making decisions based on data. You're going to be operational efficiency, going to go up. But then in reality, you can see the license, the usage, it's in the survey, it's a fraction of that. Versus what we're finding with embedded analytics, and now where we think we can go with the AI technology and the analytics platform as a service underneath that, to help make it so it's whether you're technically no code, low code, or pro code type integration,
Hmm.
um, you're really measuring your business metrics now. And so with customers we've had done this with, we saw that they had ROI in their actual business metrics because it's the workflow that's being used. It's the workflow
Hmm.
that's executing better. You start able to manage not just who's using the analytics, but you actually get to see impact more on your business since you're actually trying to improve your business processes. So I do think there's an opportunity to think in terms of that rather than pure usage of a third-party tool that's
Right.
being front end of your data versus no, we're seeing that we're having an impact on our actions on our business. And so that could be a
Yeah.
better way to think about where we would want to go in terms of understanding usage.
Well, and that, I mean, this is a key part of the process because, what I believe is that if you have embedded analytics, then you have a much better chance of being able to track how often data led to a decision. I mean, it can be simple things even. So a dashboard that shows revenue per month or something like that, or per product. And if you can take action from within that environment and trigger someone, send an email, do say, hey, let's talk about this and make sure we're on the right track. My point is that if you have instrumentation in your environment and can thus determine when data is helping decisions, that's really important. Because
Yeah.
if you just ask people, they're not going to know. I mean, they may even forget or get it wrong or say they did what they didn't, not even trying to be dishonest, just because people are busy and you make a lot of decisions throughout your day. So if your environment has some instrumentation, to me, that is one of the best ways that you can really start to learn whether or not the data is helping. What do you think?
I totally agree with that. And I think I've seen in the past, well, I'm going to go back before Sisense. I saw competitors do a great job of reporting ROI when we didn't have that statistic, and I was on the other end of not having that statistic. So
Right.
that was before Sisense. That's my past life. And
All
so I
right.
do see the importance of understanding the usage and the value that ROI of that work. And maybe in our industry, we don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of really reporting the impact that all this work we do around data is having on the business in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it ends up being like you're always having to justify, we're paying for that again this year. Those statistics would help any group say, yes, this tool is helping us as a business, and here's how I can show you that usage. Um,
Right.
but I do think that I go back to business metrics are also important. And I do think rather than having dashboards, if you move, when we see this movement towards context, I think there's other things. The access of data in that context could be the pure analytics usage, but also you could start seeing some impact on whether you're being more successful with that workflow, achieving the actions that you want.
Yeah, and there's a tremendous amount of Gen AI now in the marketplace, and one of the things I've noticed are these note takers. Everyone has them these days. We
Mhm.
use Read AI. There's Otter. I mean, Zoom has its own note takers, and it's kind of amazing how well they often do at breaking down everything from talking points to action items, for example. And I kind of see a next generation coming along where you can set up workflows, especially as a BI company, as an analytics company, to where the directors of sales teams, for example, get aggregates of all those calls. And so even
Mhm.
though it does hallucinate, even though it doesn't catch everything, it catches a lot when you use these technologies. And I see that really feeding into what could be a very virtuous cycle for using analytics to drive your decision making because if you connect it up properly, you should be able to sort of glean and understand, and then even ask questions of the model. Hey, who's using analytics the most? What benefits are we seeing? You might be surprised what you see coming down the pike from that perspective. What do you think?
I think I wasn't thinking in terms of that, but I do like what you're saying in terms of that kind of conversation because we see that same conversation just around the data itself, not about usage, right? Um, and we do understand the concept of hallucinations and the challenges around that, but we also think that we're in this period of AI of co-piloting. It's like you're not letting it run by itself, but it is
Right.
helping you, but you do have that human expert to judge whether the information that it's saying can be relied upon. But
Right.
also, as we learn to develop, even with the current technology, we're finding there's very reliable things that you can trust it to actually communicate on. And
Hmm.
so we have features that are part of embedding experience of called explanations or narratives, which allow you to get this information around the data that's saying, and then the human can read it and say, yes, I should follow up on that. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
if that's in your example of usage data, exactly the same kind of thing, right? Those things can actually really help you understand whether people are using analytics in your business if you can collect the data that allows it to look at that.
Yeah. Well, and some of these new technologies are really powerful. I mean, Bolt.new is an interesting one. There's a whole bunch of them for like generating apps, for example. There's a company, OutSystems, their no code is called Mentor, and you can just load a requirements document into it, and it builds the app for you, and you're like, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on here? So
Yeah.
here's somewhat of a curveball question. How much do AI infused BI vendors need to stay on top of innovation to maintain their traction and to stay top of mind for companies when you could just use ChatGPT, and even though you may not get the right answer, it's easy to our point, it's quick to use. How much from a strategic perspective do you folks have to stay on top of what these models are doing and weave them into your offering?
Well, I think, I would say that I saw one of your podcasts, someone talked about, okay, imagine someone puts on the ground a bunch of parts to cars and say, okay, that's open source. Right. I
Right.
love that analogy someone said in one of your podcasts. It was worth the whole podcast to see that one analogy.
That's
Um,
funny.
but the thing is that you have to keep up with the innovation. And that's why I think someone like Sisense, a vendor like this that does analytics platform as a service, is constantly investing into that versus if you're just doing open source and internal development, you never have enough to get to Rev 2. And
Right.
so we feel the pressure to stay on top of the innovation. And we have to be careful because it's moving so fast right now. What we think in 6 months may be
Right.
different. And so
Right.
very challenging environment, but we are making those investments. We have our vision on where we think the world is going and try to meet it there rather than thinking where it should have been 3 months ago. And so we're
Right.
constantly looking at that and working on that. And that's why platforms that are good at that will be obvious as the market matures. And then you want to hook up to one of those platforms. So you're always ready. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the importance of the no code, low code options for integration.
Mhm.
Because you
Mhm.
can't have a 6 month integration project or a year project
Right.
because the world's going to change. But if you have
Right.
low code, no code options or AI enable tools for creators, then you're not investing a lot to get the latest thing in, and then you can move to the next one without having to rip up, 6 months of multi people kind of effort. And so I think there's also an end on the implementation has to be low cost in order to keep up with the next thing as you want to
Right.
incorporate it to stay competitive.
Isn't that fascinating? And we've all seen with the advent of cloud computing writ large, software as a service, we've seen the move from CapEx to OpEx, right?
Yeah.
You went from 10, 15 years ago, all right, we need $2 million to build a data warehouse. It's going to take us 18 months. You can't do that anymore. I mean, it's just like,
Well,
what are you talking about? I mean,
yeah.
Snowflake even came along, and I like you, I've been in this business for a while. So we went through the whole Hadoop phase. I was really scratching my head during that time. I'm like, this is interesting, no doubt. It's a very compelling technology for certain use cases, but MapReduce is not going to solve the world's problems. I mean, it is interesting, and for certain things, it's very powerful. But there are a lot of aspects of that. I was like, I don't know about this is going to work out, guys. And of
Mhm.
course, eventually it didn't, right? The Hadoop elephant kind of disappeared, and now you have the companies sunsetting their Hadoop instances. But we did learn a lot throughout those years. But the point is, uh, after that, like as Hadoop was starting to falter, what happened? Snowflake starts rising. What is Snowflake? Enterprise Data Warehouse. So we went from
Yeah.
this whole, and I know the guys at Cloudera, and I remember like having some debates with them. They're like, "Oh yeah, this data warehousing thing, it's old. It's data science. That's the new thing." And it's like, "Oh, I hear what you're saying, but data warehousing has enough structure to it to deliver value reliably if you do it well, of course. Data science is unwieldy. I mean, you're talking about taking any data source in any format, any style, trying to make some sense out of it. That is not easy to do. It takes a long time to build out models to get the value. So it's just interesting that we kind of strayed away from the data warehousing that came roaring back with
Right.
Snowflake and even Databricks, which is more of a sort of machine learning data sciencey platform. They offer data warehousing. So it's
Yeah.
like the data warehousing mantra, that whole reality is not going away anytime soon. I think it's going to be a foundation for quite some time. But I guess my long rant here is to say that things continue to evolve, but the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Like there is going to be value to the modeling and the deterministic nature of data warehousing, no matter how exciting the AI world gets. What do you think?
I, I don't know where to start because there's a lot there, but I agree with
That was a lot.
99.99%. And the one part I might not agree with, I just didn't hear it. So,
That's
but it's
funny.
good. There's a word that, aren't we still just trying to build a decision support system?
Right,
Is that what we called it in the 80s and the 90s?
right,
So
right.
it so it comes back around. And that's why I described the when you point to the problem, that hasn't changed. And so BI is one solution. These others, what I'm talking about today with you, based on what we see in the survey, hey, there's this opportunity for embedded analytics and context. That's another solution. I think that some of those tools are getting better and better, but the problem we're trying to solve has always been that one statement, which is we're just trying to make good decisions and we
Hmm.
want to make them fast. And
Right.
so, and we'll circle back to what works. And if you look at the pattern of what's called disruptive technologies, right? You do one thing well, but not the other things. And some people start using it. And then it slowly closes the gap on those other things the prior technologies had been doing. And then you have the disruption. So that's how we went to
Hmm.
Web 2.0 in the internet, right? It wasn't very interactive. It wasn't all that stuff. But then with the advent of Ajax and all the technology and the ability to have interactive web applications, you know, Office 360 is on the web now, right? All that happened. But what you see is with when I think about the map R situation, it didn't quite cover those things that the other technologies really brought to the table. And so we reverted back
Interesting.
to bring those forward. And that's where you get the snowflakes and things. And so I
Yeah,
do
that's
think there's
interesting.
this new innovation. If it can't cover all of it, it somehow absorbs and comes into life with the old innovation as we move forward, because we're still trying to do this thing. Can we make decisions on data? Decision support, isn't that still what we're doing? It's not
Right.
thick client X Windows type interfaces anymore. It's
Right.
on bigger data and bigger things, but it's
Sure.
still a common problem we're trying to solve, I
Yeah.
think, through all this.
Well, and then there is, and maybe we can get into this in the next segment too. There is the augmentation of traditional data environments
Right.
thanks to Gen AI. Now you got to watch out because this is generative. It does make stuff up. That's what it was designed to do. I was on a little Twitter thread a couple years ago with the go-to-market guy from OpenAI, and he responded to something. So I, jumped on, being a journalist, went back and forth with him. And I said, "What about the hallucinations?" He goes, "Well, remember, they're really more of a feature than a bug, right? I mean, this is what these things were designed to do, is to spin stuff up. So now we have this whole effort going into trying to ground these models and use RAG models, retrieval augmented generation, graph RAG. I think it's very interesting stuff. So maybe we could talk about how you can leverage the Gen AI stuff without sacrificing quality and integrity, which is pretty important. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Steven Griffith of Sisense, all about using data to drive decisions. And we've gone down this interesting path with Gen AI, which is very powerful technology. I mean, really, the stuff that these engines can show you is a bit mind blowing, and it's very convincing. I think that's the blessing and the curse, is that whatever answer it gives you, it's very convincing. And we had a guy on the show a couple weeks ago that said, always ask it this question first. Do you know XYZ? Or can you answer this question or something? So they're little tricks of the trade to use. And of course, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that's a big deal these days. I find graph RAG to be probably the best way to do that, where you've got your enterprise data at the foundation, you build a knowledge graph on top of that, and then the knowledge graph is called upon, which you can do like with this new model context protocol. You can have the LLM call upon your graph to get additional context about relationships between things, for example, between products and services, customers, deliverables, whatever the case may be. That's valuable because the at the bottom at the end of the day, these things do make stuff up. And so how do you mitigate the hallucinations, as they call them, while still leveraging the power And the answer is Copilot. The answer is you have a decision support system, which is fueled with your enterprise data, but leverages the natural language processing of these models to give ideas, which the user can then choose to accept or not accept. Isn't that right, Steve?
I think that's right. So there's two aspects of that. One is the importance of those being part of the embed experience that customers can do. And then what you're talking about is the quality of that experience, right? And the hallucinations and the things like that that we all find in that technology. And before even AI, I've always thought about the flow of a feature development, right? I have the feature I can tell in an elevator pitch. It takes me about 30 seconds. I'm going to tell you about this idea. You could go, wow. And then I can show you a slideshow, Figma walkthrough, something that's not software, but it has the screens. And you'll ask me to go to another page. And I go, no, it only goes through these set of slides. This isn't real software. And I
Right.
can show you the value of that. And then there's the demo. The demo is where you have a proof of concept or demo, and I could run the software for you, but I can't give you the keys. I'm avoiding landmines. Some things, usually a dentist could be very honest, but it may have stuff that's not implemented yet because you're seeing buttons that we haven't, but we're going to show you one use case in actual
Right.
software.
Right.
And it has, oh my God, that's amazing kind of feeling if you do certain problems that are really challenging. And AI you can make some killer demos. They're amazing, right? But there's another one, two steps that are after that. One is the evaluation step where the customer can try it with their data and they see the value and they experience it themselves. But sometimes that's not as sophisticated as the data in the entire enterprise or the bigger problem. So the next step after that is that magical GA MVP. I can do this for my job and I can rely on it. And it's what I use every day. And I'll write you customer compliments about this when you write it. And we read them on Friday at work. Say, oh my God, this customer said these great things about this thing we gave them. That
Right.
last step is the challenge of AI, is getting to what you just described with these architectures that you implement and all those things to where it can be relied on every day. And the co-pilot, the human in the equation has to be there, but also you can't be confusing for that human that's in that equation based on
Right.
what it's saying. So it has to be a level of accuracy to be really helping with the job. And I describe it two ways. One is just elevating its IQ. You implement to these systems and it doesn't feel smart, right? And so it demoed well, but when I actually got to use it, I'm teaching it, I'm not relying on it because I'm better at my job than it's doing. Then the
Right.
other case of where it could be really smart, but can I really trust that it becomes a trust issue?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is the challenge of AI. There's architectures and things that you described as technology that we've implemented that we're all trying to find is the right way in order to have that be a positive experience and reliable to actually do your job and use it.
Mm-hmm.
You look at analytics, and we've done enough to know that it is the path. We know the destination. We're just working out with how we get from here to there with these different architectures and designs that we put.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll throw another bit of a curveball at you. Data warehouse, we worked on that for 40 plus years. It's become very sophisticated, very durable. Number of different players in the market, some big ones, obviously Snowflake, Databricks. You've got Redshift that used to be Parexel. I knew the guys from Parexel. Lots of different Teradata, of course, is still out there. They're still doing some things. Then this data lake comes along, and everyone's talking about schema on read and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
then you get Iceberg that comes along to kind of sit on top of that and provide some manageability. It's really interesting to me to see this evolution. And I have to say, to a certain extent, I remember thinking to myself when the data lake was really starting to get a lot of attention, and you hear people talking about data swamp and stuff of this nature. I thought to myself, are we making the same mistake all over again? Like back in the day, we pulled all this data into a warehouse because we realized you couldn't query operational systems. So there's a very
Right.
specific reason to do that. And we stripped out all the context to get it just down to the numbers because you can crunch numbers, right? You can't crunch images, you can't crunch text.
Mhm.
That's why the large language models convert images and text to vectors and then back to images and text because you can crunch numbers. But in this whole data lake world, again, like, all right, put it all in one big place. Is that really the smart way to go? What do you think about federated queries and federated systems and not having to force everything into a box or a swamp or a lake? Where is that in the sort of arc of innovation in our decision support world?
So I I struggle. There's a single version of truth. That's been a mantra in our industry since the warehouse concept came up. And, my 30 years in this industry started in the semiconductor industry. So I do feel like I was exposed to big data before the rest of the world did social
Mm.
networking or the
Wow.
internet happened. And so, and then we had to go to equivalent of a data lake because there was no system at that time that could handle that kind of data. But I do think that we still live in a world of siloed data. There's so many companies out there that haven't even gotten to that concept
Right.
to experience the downside of it.
Right.
They still see it as the shiny thing on the hill to try to strive towards. Um, so I do think that having the ability to combine your data across your operations together for analytics is one of the key values, right? And I do think um, that's still a thing. I still think that's so important. I haven't seen where, you know, that's not the approach that most companies will strive for, of having that single version of truth.
Hmm.
But combining data doesn't necessarily have to be in a data lake. There are some lower cost, more feasible solutions when, to tell you the truth, it takes a lot of resources to get that single version of everything. And
Yeah.
so there are, call them short term, that last 5 years.
Hmm.
And use an analytic tool that can even, we have the ability to combine data from different sources and allow a single experience in an embed application. So you don't necessarily have to do it. And also sometimes those kind of alternatives are really about optimizing the application. It's not really meant to be in the data lake. It's meant to be something that's a little bit higher level because you want to do it for pure performances reasons, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so I think you can't have one mindset where this is a religious kind of
Right.
dogma.
That's
It's
right.
more, the world's much more practical in reality to where you make some different choices as you go along.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw another fun question at you here. It's just popping into my head because I track all these innovations over the years. Software defined storage, we had software defined networking is another thing. What about software defined analysis or software defined analytics, where the analysis that's being delivered is dynamic based upon inputs, feeds, what's happening in the environment? Are we there yet? Do we yet have something we can call software defined analytics? What do you think?
I haven't thought about that in that sense, so I'll be just making it up a little bit. But being adaptive and stuff, I think that is the future. When you hear about agents, you hear about more stuff like that. I think the world could become much more dynamic in that sense.
Yeah.
And we're much more in I mean, our dynamic right now is just getting the data to stream. It's
Hmm.
like, there's a big difference between looking at yesterday and every day before versus looking at right now.
Right.
Right. But having the analytics also be more dynamic. I think, in manufacturing, I did a lot with control charts and monitoring and real-time feeds coming from manufacturing, right? And we actually have split the feeds in terms of that. But so I do think there's traditional statistics and traditional things that are dynamic, but I'm not sure where and what's possible, but it seems like there should be something possible now on the analytics side with AI and other things doing things.
Yeah.
But when you talk about, there's a way I think about BI when I was pondering humans and BI, and it was like each part of our senses is a part of BI, and
Right.
and and it's not just BI. It could be the workflows and the applications that you use. One is the ears. Pull me into something. Something's going wrong. I just hear something. Right.
Right.
Eyes. I'm walking across the room and look at a TV, and I know my sales are down.
Yeah.
So we can go into the next segment on that. That sounds like you're.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do that, folks. We'll be right back. Podcast bonus segment coming up. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio, talking to Steven Griffith of Sisense and your host here, Eric Kavanagh. Steven, you made a really good point there at the end that decision support really is about pulling in insights that are similar to what human beings have: sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. These are all different senses. I've actually just started doing some work with an amazing guy, Dr. Moshe Cohen, who was instrumental in building the Iron Dome over there in Israel. And we did a show about how they were able to stop all 500 ballistic missiles over two separate attacks. Almost every single one was knocked down. I think there was one that strayed a little bit later. But he talks all about how they built their own foundational models to do stream processing, like basically to get signal as the information is coming in. Starts with the satellites, then radar, then you use all sorts of other sensors. But the point is, you got lots of different sensors, feelers out there, instrumentation basically, which you can then analyze as it's flowing, and that's a whole different world. I mean, that's like the Confluence of the world, the red pandas of the world, basically being able to leverage this streaming data. I've always found that yes, it's going to be great if you do that correctly. I think there is a really weird impedance mismatch between streaming data and traditional persistence of data in databases and data warehouses and things. So it's like, how do you balance those two out? But to your point earlier, immediacy, knowing what's happening now is very, very valuable, especially if you can map that against the norm, which is your historical data, right? So historically, we sell 200 widgets on Wednesdays. Today we're selling 500. What the heck's going on? Is there a marketing campaign? Is there something else going on? You're always going to have to ask another question to kind of put all the pieces together. But if you're streaming and you're analyzing the streaming data, that gets you a lot closer to real time and to being able to respond quickly, right?
And I think that it all depends on the business model of the business that's at play of what important is, right?
Right.
Um, if you're on the manufacturing side, that could be in semiconductor is huge because you have issues go wrong. You have material that you have to keep your volumes up and achieve the amount of flow you need, or else you're not going to make orders 12 months from now that you're trying to ship, right?
Right.
So acting immediately
Right.
is so important, so
Right.
important for them. But there was so much data. There was also a whole analysis of what's gone on the last. Those more the what happened and what's happening and can we predict?
Right.
They had all three needs for there.
Right.
Um, but I wanted to finish my little comment about the senses. So
Yeah.
in that environment, the ear is the important one because the system should be telling you, hey, come look at this. This is an issue. And you'd rather be in your workflow, like where they would take actions and click the button to put what they call a lot on hold, because that's how they would hold the wafers up so they could have someone look at the machine, right?
Right.
You don't want to do that in a BI tool and then go over to find three other screens to find the lot on hold tool. You'd like that
Hmm.
analysis to be done as part of where you're going to do the action in the workflow.
Right.
And then even releasing the lot on hold is an analysis. So you'd like that analysis to be in that tool as well, where you could actually, hey, you know what? Uh, just have them, fix the pins that touch the chip because they're bent. Go forward. So action and everything should be in the context of where you're doing that work, but that's an example of that live stream and the importance of it. And if there's so much more that we could do than the simple stuff they were monitoring because of the sophistication of AI and that stuff, that would be even better. But
Yeah.
that's to me is the ears. The eyes is when you walk across the room and you said you saw the sales down today. What the heck's going on? And then I always thought the hands were like Minority Report when Tom Cruise is moving through all the screens. You don't have to think. Everything's as fast, but you're in some tool that allows you to do that.
Right.
I think we're moving away from that. I think I'd rather think of the Seinfeld episode where Kramer had the movie thing channel or on his phone and like
Right.
telling people like push this button, push that button, and finally just like, just tell me the movie you want to watch.
Right.
I
That's
think we're
great.
moving to that with AI is instead of doing
That's
this with your
interesting.
hands, you can just tell it what you want to know. And that's
Wow.
a little slower, but instantaneous triage is what I call it. But verbally is going to be so much a better experience than I don't know Photoshop anymore because I hadn't looked at it for 3 months. And I had to click through these. No, you can just say, I need to know this and
Right.
get that information. And then the brain part is the where you have a partner but you're asking questions that have never been asked before. And I think there's a level of there that we get to, and that's where you called about that next level of AI where it's creative. But
Mm.
you can have more of that, okay, I have novel questions I want to figure out for my data. And these have
Right.
not been asked before, so no dashboard exists with them, but I can actually engage with an expert to help me figure some new ideas out.
Hmm.
Oh, we should only email our potential sales 3 times a week because that's the highest probability of success. They'll call us back. I
Right.
didn't know that was something I should look at, but I talked to this thing and it actually did the analysis, and I know now we can optimize sales. So
Wow.
that's questions you've never asked before. That isn't really a BI thing, but it could be a thing when we do this AI stuff.
Yeah, and I think that the AI and the data warehousing should come together. I'll throw this closing thought at you. I had this idea, gosh, before the LLMs even came out, because I was just thinking about what AI can generate and the kinds of insights it can find for you. But I to use your analogy, I use the data warehouse as your left eye and the AI as your right eye. Because if you don't have two eyes, you can't get depth perception, right? Because these two eyes are triangulating on an object in front of me that's getting closer. That's how I have depth perception. That's how baseball players can hit that home run because they have really good depth perception and the ability to time things. But what do you think about that analogy that going forward, you want to use both eyes and your ears and your nose and everything else, but the data warehousing is one eye and then the AI is your other eye? What do you think?
I think that's right. And I'll go back to this concept of what we call analytics platform as a service is the thing that helps companies with that eye on the left that the whatever eye that was the analytic eye, right? Because you really, and I think I liked what we talked about today, which I didn't think of before. Some of this conversation really helped me see some things, so I appreciate it. But the
There you
idea
go.
that you really have to lower the cost of implementation of those solutions because of the innovation that's happening in this space. You
Right.
can't do it yourself, take 6 months, and then find out you have to do it all over again if it's not your core business.
That's
And so
right.
there is companies that the core business is going to be enabling those companies to have that extra eye on their data, part of
Yeah.
the problem.
I love that. Well, folks, look this gentleman up online, Steven Griffith, and he's with Sisense. That's Sisense. Very, very cool company. They've been doing this stuff for a while. They've learned some lessons, so they know how to deliver and how to stay on top of a fast-moving industry, folks. Things are changing by the day, but don't be fooled. Gen AI is not going to solve all your problems. You need to analyze the data. You need to understand the data. You need to persist the data. That's the deterministic side. The stochastic side is fun for exploration and understanding and coming up with new ideas, but don't mess up on delivery because that's the most important thing in business is to sell and then deliver what you sold. But we'll be back next week, folks. Send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@dmradio.biz. You've been listening to DM Radio.